Hey YouTube, so here again with another update. So as you can see, I've got the front springs set up. I did get the front shocks finally, and I put the spacers on there. Those actually are made for rear shocks to space up the shock about 2 inches. I did have to grind the inside of where the shock goes on the bracket to make it a little wider. They're aluminum, so you can't bend them. But I did that so that I could get the shock to sit in there a little better. It did work out pretty well. I did install the track bar. So this again I think is the Synergy track bar. Pretty heavy duty adjustable track bar. One thing I did notice on it is that adjustment, I'm glad I took it apart because there was no never sees on it, and then also it had thread locker on it, which makes no sense because that's what the jam nuts are for. It's supposed to be adjustable. So just if you buy one of these, just take it apart and make sure you put thread locker on it and clean off any of the thread locker and put some never sees on it. I did replace the bolts. I will say basically just be careful too. There's 2 sets of metal bushings that come in this track bar. The metal bushing that it comes assembled with is the larger inside diameter. And I've noticed on some of the videos on folks that have installed these, you see a lot of play at the bolt. That told me they had the wrong bushing in there. So they give you the right bushings with it. You just gotta, pound them through and put the smaller inside diameter bushing with it. I did replace the bolts. Those are 9/16 bolts. It's about the same outside diameter as the metric bolts that were in there. But what I liked about these a little better is the shoulder of the bolt goes almost all the way through. Yes, it is a little tricky to get that nut on the back. But I did find that by just putting it on the open end of the wrench and feeding it in there and then looking through the front to see where the opening of the nut was, that I could get it together okay. So no big deal there. I did get some headers for this. So I originally bought some JBA headers. They didn't even come close to fitting. There was a lot of interference right here. There's about 5 or so vendors on eBay that sell this style header. It's really kind of a no-name brand. I don't know who makes it. And it did fit a lot better. This tube in particular fit just fine. But in order to make room for the front tube to kind of come down along the frame rail here and then kind of tuck down into this lower tube, I needed to replace, cut out both. But that shouldn't be too bad to redo. And then similarly over here, this tube is right up against the frame, so I've already sectioned out some material, but I'm going to have to section out some more to pull this tube in some towards the head. And then at the same time I'm going to have to do this one because this one runs behind that one to the point where I'm only going to get so much inward movement, and then it's going to start to hit this tube. Which is fine because I'm actually hitting on the transmission down here as well. So when I move this tube, I'll move them both together and get the clearance I need. It is going to be fairly tight too. You can see that one of them is almost right on top of the frame. So that's one of the tubes I plan on moving anyway, so not a big deal. But as far as the collectors go, there's plenty of room for the collectors. I did remove this bracket off the other side, which I'll show you here in a minute. I had to do that basically to get this collector so it wouldn't hit the frame because that bracket was right here. I tried to do the best job I could to make it look like it was totally factory, so you can't even tell that I took the bracket off. I ground it out all really nice. As you can see, I'm still waiting for the Synergy long arms to come. As soon as they come, I can put them on, but I am going to probably cut the rear of the frame here, or the middle of the frame. I've been waiting long enough, and I think with the jack stands under the front axle and the jack stands under the frame, I'll put my engine hoist on the motor just to take some of the weight off the front, but I feel pretty comfortable. The front of the frame will kind of stay where it needs to stay, and then I'll put a jack under the back just so I can roll it forward eventually. Other than that, the only other updates I have is with regard to the bumper. So I did test fit the 1500 bumper and it bolts on just fine. The only thing I did notice, which was kind of interesting, is this bolt I had to actually take out. So there's 4 bolts, you can see here, 3 left, that hold the bumper on to each of the brackets. I don't know if when they built the truck somebody just forgot to drill a hole and the assembly line worker just basically didn't put a bolt there, but that's where the 4th hole should be, and it's not. Then you've got one here, and then the 2 down the bottom. I don't think it has to do with the Power Wagon because this bracket is generic to the 2500s, and so is this. The only thing that really gets unique to the 2500 is the winch mount, which literally just gets sandwiched between the frame bolts that hold this whole bumper mount assembly on, and it's the same on both sides. But that's the only thing that's unique that I know of to the Power Wagon. These brackets right here, actually on the 1500, look identical to the 2500, except this isn't there. It had the one with the bar that went across with like the hooks, but again, you can see there's no hole here, and then the one in the top, and then there's the 2 in the bottom. So last thing I will say about the headers is that these are square port heads, 2008 and down are square port. I do have a set of 2011 D port heads, and I'm going to use those when I put the motor back together because the headers are actually D port headers. They don't come in a square port configuration, at least not this style one. I think the only company that really makes the right header for these is American Racing, and they make square and D port. But those headers are $1,700 and these headers were $200, so I'm okay with cutting up a set of $200 headers. I am going to do I've finally decided on the motor. I'm going to do a stroker kit on the motor. I ordered an Eagle crank with H-beam rods, 10,000 silver pistons, so it'll be roughly a 396 when I'm done. I think it'll maybe make another 100 horsepower. I am going to put a comp cam in it as well, but nothing too radical because it still can use my factory valve springs, so I'm assuming it's got just a little more lift and duration. But with that said, I'm not going to swap out the transmission at this time. I know there's companies out there that make stage 1, 2, and 3 level transmissions that can handle additional power. But I'm going to roll the dice for a little bit because really I just want to get the truck back together. And as far as the motor, what really tipped the scales for the motor is several of the studs from the exhaust manifolds broke in the head. And I tried welding nuts on them and all kinds of tricks that you see on YouTube, and yeah, it didn't work. So it needs to be extracted properly from a machine shop. I even tried drilling one out and putting an extractor in it. And I mean, I got a decent size hole in the bolt and the decent size extractor in there, and that thing didn't budge. So I needed to pull the heads anyways to get that done. So I decided if I'm going to pull the heads, I might as well swap them over to the 2011. I will have to check on the intake manifold. I think I heard online that the 2011 heads use a different intake manifold at the ports, but I'm not so convinced of that yet. I've been messing around with these cars for a while now and haven't necessarily seen that to be true, but I could be wrong and we'll find out. But yeah, last thing is, I'm ready to start cutting this frame. I'm pretty much done admiring the problem. I'm not going to wait for the synergy links anymore. I'll at least get it cut and ready so I can start getting it ready to weld back together, but I won't actually weld it back together until I remove the cab off the donor truck. And the reason being is because I've got, I think this is a 7/8 diameter pipe right here, and it actually fits. It fits perfectly inside these mounts. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to cut this pipe into several sections, and I'm going to put some in the front and the rear mounts, and then I'm going to weld square tube as an X-brace to go across. I'm going to do that off of the 1500 frame, so that basically I'm going to have my own jig that I can now drop onto this frame and all things